Imagine a world where everything is as it should be. No stress, no striving, just perfect peace. Sounds impossible, right? But from the very beginning, that was God's design. We live in a world that never stops. From the moment we wake up, we're checking notifications and rushing from one thing to the next, always feeling like there's more to do. But that's not the life that God intended. From the very beginning, God designed something better. In Exodus 25 to 31, the Lord is giving instructions about building his dwelling place, his tabernacle, the place where he'll dwell in our midst. And he concludes those instructions in Exodus 31 by calling us to rest, to Shabbat, to rest in his presence. Just before the book of Exodus describes God's people obeying those instructions in chapter 35 and assembling the tabernacle, the Lord repeats the call to Shabbat. Shabbat and the tabernacle, God's dwelling place, are intimately connected with each other. They're two powerful symbols that tell the story of our past, our present, and our future. God built rest into the very fabric of creation. Before we ever lifted a hand to work, we were given rest. You think about it. When was humanity created? Adam and Eve were created on the sixth day. What day was our first full day? Shabbat. Before Adam worked, before he cultivated the ground, before he did anything, he rested with God. His first experience was one of relationship, not labor. That was always God's design. Shabbat was never about recovering from exhaustion. It was about starting from a place of wholeness. It was a gift, an invitation into his presence where nothing was lacking. That was always the plan. But when sin entered, we were driven out of that rest. Fruitfulness, whether it was tending the earth or bringing forth new life, became characterized then by atzav, by pain. Rest became something we had to fight for. Instead of resting, we began striving. Instead of walking with God, we hid from him. Yet even in exile, God gave us this weekly reminder of what we lost and what he would restore. Shabbat. It says, surely you must keep my Shabbatot, my Shabbats, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, so you may know that I am Adonai who sanctifies you. Every week, Shabbat calls us back to the original design, to stop striving and to remember that we were created to rest in him. If Shabbat is a glimpse of the rest we lost, the tabernacle is a picture of the dwelling place we lost. In Eden, God walked with us. After sin, we were cast out, and cherubim guarded the way back. But then in the wilderness, God told Israel to build a tabernacle, a miniature Eden, as it were, a place where his presence would dwell in our midst again. And inside that tabernacle, cherubim over the ark, the very place where the Lord says, I'll meet with you. And then cherubim embroidered on the entry point, on the veil, just like in Eden, guarding the way in. Do you see it? The tabernacle was God's way of still saying, I want to be with you. I want to dwell with you. It was never meant to be the final plan, though. It was pointing to something greater. The entire story, Eden, Shabbat, the tabernacle, all leads to Yeshua. The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. And just as God's presence filled the tabernacle, Yeshua came as God with us. And what did he bring? Rest. He says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. He is the reality that Shabbat points to. He is the dwelling place that the tabernacle foreshadowed. And one day we won't just glimpse these things. We will live in them fully. Revelation 21:3 tells us the final chapter at the end of the book, behold, the dwelling place of God is among men, and he shall tabernacle among them. That's where all of this is leading, to his rest, to his presence. Are you living like someone who trusts in God's rest? Some of us are still living like we're in Egypt, working ourselves to exhaustion, believing our worth comes from what we produce, but Pharaoh is not our master. Some of us are still living in the wilderness, unsure if we can trust God to provide, but the manna will fall again tomorrow. Some of us stand outside the veil, afraid to step into his presence, but Yeshua has already torn the curtain in two. And you? Lay down your burdens today at the feet of Yeshua and step into the rest that his presence fully and freely gives.